Hello and welcome to Syncplicity, where we're going to talk today about the Active Directory Sync tool. We're going to introduce you a little bit more about what the tool does, what it is, and how you can benefit from it. And we're also going to do a live setup of ADSync. We get the question a lot, can Syncplicity integrate with our Active Directory? And the answer is yes and yes. We can authenticate your users to your Active Directory, and we can also provision and deprovision users between your Active Directory and Syncplicity. So if we split this column here in two sections, left for authenticating users and right for user management, user provisioning, we can support any SAML-based identity provider for authenticating users. Some of them are on-premise, they run in your data center, and some of them are running off-premise. For the on-premise, we support ADFS and CH SiteMinder. For user provisioning, we can provision and deprovisioning users based on your Active Directory, and we can also synchronize the group memberships between the Active Directory and Syncplicity. And the advantage here is that there is only one single user directory that you need to maintain. When users are created in Active Directory, they get automatically provisioned in Syncplicity. If the user changes group in Active Directory, the user will also change groups in Syncplicity. Of course, and this is what the most of our customers are looking for, when a user is disabled in Active Directory, then that user will immediately lose access in Syncplicity to the browser from all his devices, and we can also do a remote wipe. So make the distinction between on-premise and off-premise. For user provisioning, which runs somewhere in the cloud, or in this case Ping can run completely on-premise. These can also be used for authentication, so they do both. They do both authentication and user provisioning, while Microsoft Active Directory Federation Services and Shibboleth or CH SiteMinder can only authenticate users. And then for user management, you could use the self-provisioning URL, which require SSO to be activated. We're not going to discuss here. You could use our APIs, and a lot of our customers use our APIs to do that user management from their user management tool into Syncplicity. And since 2016, we also have got a tool which is called Active Directory Sync. Now, why have we created the Active Directory Sync tool? For most customers, this is the ideal solution if they are not yet on a third-party SSO solution like Ping or Okta or OneLogin. In the past, that was the only way we had to do user management. Now with ADSync tool, we can do that without the requirement for a third-party tool. Or it's for those customers an ideal solution who don't trust something that doesn't run on-premise. With the exception of Ping, Okta and OneLogin, they run in the cloud, and for some customers that is an issue. Anyway, it will improve the security, because when a user is disabled in Active Directory, then the ADSync tool can automatically disable that user also in Syncplicity. And lastly, like I mentioned, we have a lot of customers who use tools like ADFS, which does authentication but not user management. For those customers who are using ADFS, ADSync tool is a nice addition to do that user management. How does it look like from an architecture perspective? So the ADSync tool runs on-premise inside your firewall. It actually talks to the Active Directory using LDAP queries. It fetches data, and based on that data, it will do things in Syncplicity, and it will pass via the Syncplicity API gateway. It will talk over port 389 LDAP or 636 for secured LDAP, and it will talk on port 443 SSL to the Syncplicity API gateway. What are the advantages? We have mentioned earlier, we synchronize users, we create users in Syncplicity when they're added in Active Directory, we deprovision users in Syncplicity when they are disabled or removed in the Active Directory. And again, this is the major reason why our customers use ADSync tool to do that automatically deprovisioning. One side note with that is when users are already in Syncplicity but they are not known in Active Directory, then these users will be disabled, which can sometimes be an issue in a POC or in a demo where you added users in Syncplicity that are not part in Active Directory. So be aware of this behavior. We can synchronize the groups from Active Directory to Syncplicity, which means not only the groups but also the group membership. When a user moves from one group in Active Directory to another, we will replicate that change to Syncplicity. And also very nice is that you can synchronize roles in Syncplicity, like global admins or support administrators. You can synchronize those roles with custom groups that you created for this functionality in Active Directory. Some of my customers ask me, can I use it without SSO? Yes, of course, there's no problem, but our recommendation is to use it in combination with SSO. We're gonna show how it works. We send out an LDAP query from the ADSync tool using secured credentials to your LDAP, your Active Directory. It will get results and it will provision these users from Active Directory into Syncplicity. Not only do we sync users, we also run a query to the Active Directory to fetch the groups that you want to synchronize between Active Directory and Syncplicity. And lastly, we also can disable a user when he's disabled in Active Directory. Again, in the next batch, based on that query, we will disable that user in Syncplicity. And some frequently asked questions we get a lot from our customers, like, is this gonna cost me some money? No, of course not. ADSync tool comes with your Enterprise Edition subscription. It doesn't require SSO to be configured and working, but 99% of our customers use it in combination with SSO. Do I need to install something on the Active Directory controller? Of course not. We have made the design in such a way that you run that ADSync tool on a separate appliance. How long does it take to get it deployed? Well, we typically say that this can be done in 2 hours. The installation and the configuration can take up to between 10 minutes and 2 hours to get everything working. The challenge here is always get your LDAP queries correct. The ADSync tool is a process that needs to be scheduled. Can I use my own scheduler for this? Of course you can, as long as it can execute a command line process. Or you can use a built-in scheduler, which is a cron tab. We'll show you how that works. So from a setup perspective, how are we going to do this? We're going to download the ADSync virtual appliance. We're going to install that in a vSphere environment. We're going to get the app key, app secret, and app token to let the ADSync tool talk to Syncplicity. We're going to create a read-only Active Directory user principal name. We're going to connect this appliance to your network. And then we're going to run a wizard, ADSync-E. It's a command to configure the connections between the ADSync tool and your Active Directory and between the ADSync tool and Syncplicity. Then we're going to configure the ADSync XML. It's our configuration file to query users, to query the groups, to group name mappings and the role mappings. When that is done, we can do a test, which is actually an ADSync-D or debug. We're going to run that. If that works, then we're going to execute it as an ADSync-S and we're going to schedule it with a scheduler. Okay, so step one, how do I get the ADSync OVA appliance? Very simple. You navigate to my.syncplicity.com and you log in with your global admin account. When you are logged in, under admin, you will find a section called downloads, which will give you access to the ADSync tool. You will find the release notes, the installation and configuration guide, other online documentation, and the OVA that you can download and deploy in your vSphere environment. So in my case, I'm going to save that file. In my case, I'm going to save that file in the downloads folder. And when that is done, I'm going to deploy it in my ES6 server. Okay, so that is done. I'm not going to show you how I deployed the OVA in my vSphere environment. I also have not shown how you connect it to the network. I would recommend you to follow the documentation on that. It's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. I'm now gonna move on and get my application key, application secret, and application token. Now we've put it here in a small PowerPoint presentation. So actually you navigate to developer.syncplicity.com, which is our API layer, and you log in with a global admin. In our demo here, we log in as syncpadmin at axwaysyncplicity.com. You create an API application. That's very simple to do. And when that is done, it will give you an app key and an app secret. I would also recommend you to set the default scope to read-write. Note your app key and your app secret. Log into the Syncplicity admin console. Create a new user, an API user. In the API user, you can also define the API scope. What can that API user do in Syncplicity? And you see here we need to be able to read company information, read, create, update and delete users, read, create, update and delete groups, and read and create and delete group members. That is required for the ADSync tool to talk to Syncplicity and do its job. Of course, it's not required to give it permissions for all the other specific API functions. Then we'll impersonate that API user, and that will give us an application token, and with all those three we can start with the configuration. So if I switch back very quickly to our list of tasks, downloaded the ADSync appliance, we now have our app key, our app secret and app token. I also quickly assume that you have a user principal name, a UPN, in Active Directory that we can use to contact and talk to the Active Directory, and that you have connected your OVA to the network so we can connect to it using Putty. So what we're going to do now is run the wizard ADSync-E to configure the ADSync tool to connect to your Active Directory on one hand and to Syncplicity on the other hand. I have downloaded and installed Active Directory Explorer, which helps me a little bit to create the queries, and I have connected to my domain controller. For our demo, we use an organizational unit axwaysyncplicity.com, in which we created the groups and the users. So you see a long list of users here. We also see the groups. For our demo, we are going to synchronize all users who are part of the group Syncplicity users. This also allows me to manage which users need a Syncplicity account and which doesn't. So now I'm going to use Putty to connect to my appliance. Start with syncp, and then to make things easier, I'm going to switch to root, and I will execute the following command, which is /opt/adSync/bin/adSync-E. That is the wizard to configure the connections. It's pretty well documented, so it asks me for the URL for my LDAP server. I cheat a little bit. I have run this wizard in the past, so you see here what I entered last time. I'm going to accept that. Also going to need that username to connect to my Active Directory. Password, of course. It asks me for the URL to the Syncplicity API. My tenant is in the US, so I will use the default URL api.syncplicity.com. If your orchestration is in Europe, then you will use api.eu.syncplicity.com. It asks me for the app key, it will ask me for the app secret, and it will ask me for the application token. I've copied these in the past from my developer portal and from my admin account. It asks me to confirm if these entries are correct. I'm going to hit save. What I can now do is do a connectivity test, which is exactly the same command, but instead of -e, we will use -c, and then it will confirm that it could connect to both the Active Directory and to the Syncplicity orchestration service. If you don't get any success here, don't bother to continue any further with the configuration. You need to make sure that it can talk to both your Active Directory and the orchestration service. If it cannot do that, you can look in the following directions. Can this appliance connect to the orchestration? If it doesn't return anything like this, then probably your firewall is blocking the ADSync tool. And if you have any problems connecting to the Active Directory, also make sure that port 389 and port 636 is open in case you use encrypted connection. So great, another check mark that we have. We've run the wizard ADSync-E. We even did a successful connection test between Active Directory and the Syncplicity API. So the next part is ADSync.xml. Here we're going to configure the LDAP queries for users and groups. You saw me already showing the ADA Explorer. If you haven't downloaded it at this stage, well, please do. It's going to make your life a lot easier. So I would say let's look at that ADSync.xml. So this is the moment where I need to explain to you what I'm going to do in my demo. In my Active Directory, which is called Axway Syncplicity, I have a forest, which is Axway Syncplicity, DCSCOM. That will be my base DN. In there I have got an organizational unit, which is a little bit different from the samples that we explained earlier. And this is what is a little bit more realistic how customers organize their users. They have them stored in an organizational unit. Maybe they have multiple organizational units. And in that case, you might also create multiple user scan entries. In this case, my users are also in the organizational unit, and my groups as well. So you see here the groups and you see here the users, which are each a container. So when I need to create my Active Directory query to query my users, I'll go to the Active Directory controller. I'm logging into my Active Directory domain. I'll navigate to the forest Axway Syncplicity, and in there you see the organizational unit that I created with the same name, Axway Syncplicity. This is a little bit more realistic to what our customers have. For this demo we've done the same, so it is a little bit different from the slides that we showed earlier. And you see here that under this organizational unit Axway Syncplicity, you see all my users. And actually what I wanted to do is I want to synchronize all the users which are member of this Active Directory group 19 Syncplicity users. So for example, I'm looking for Mr. Bob Blue. He is also part of that organizational unit. If you have users spread across multiple organization units, then you will create also multiple user scan entries. I'm interested in this user, Bob Blue. I can see in the member of that he is part of my group Syncplicity users. And this is the organizational unit where I can find the user, and this is the base DN to get access to that user. So I'm going to write that in my query. So I'll go back to my Putty session and I'm going to open the configuration file. And you'll see here under the user scans, I have created a user scan entry. Like I said, if you have multiple organizational units where you need to query users from, you will create more of these user scan entries under the user scans section. I've got only one group to query, so I'm fine with that. So my base DN is this organizational unit Axway Syncplicity from the forest DC equals Axway Syncplicity DC equals com. And I have two filters. One filter is that the user must have an email address. That makes sense because Syncplicity requires the email address as a unique identifier. And the next one is that member of equals 19 Syncplicity users from that organizational unit axwaysyncplicity.com. This helps me to filter only those users who are part of the Syncplicity users group. Okay. So I've created this. I'm going to ignore the rest of the file for a second, and I'm going to see if this query works and if I can get users across. First, of course, we need to save the file. Escape colon write quit. Now I want to run the query, and therefore I'm going to launch the ADSync tool with the -d parameter, which indicates I want to debug it. And it comes with some empty or non-existing sources. So I'll check my user operations file. That is this file. And I can ignore this because probably the non or empty results were coming from the group operations. So I'm going to ignore that warning. But what's interesting for me is it says, hey, I'm going to create Mr. Bob Blue and I'm going to create Mr. Peter Red. So actually my query works fine, and I can continue with the group scan entries in order to synchronize the group memberships. And I'm going to continue with the ADSync, and I'm going to scroll down for the group scan entries. In the group scans entry, you can also create one or more group scan entries. I've done something special which is interesting for me. I want to synchronize all the groups that start with 05. So I want to synchronize the sales group, the marketing, R&D, the finance department, the management, security, and the apprentices group. I want to synchronize all these groups. Of course, you can create a group scan entry for each group individually. That's also not a problem. You will end up then having multiple group scan entries here. For me, I'm going to do that for all of them. I'm going to use that wildcard. The object class needs to be a group, but the base DN will remain the same. Let's scroll a little bit further down to our group name mappings. And you see I created for each group that I want to sync, I created a group name mapping. That is because the group name in Active Directory is a very long and not so user-friendly group name. And I'm going to replace that entire name with a group name that's much user-friendly in Syncplicity. So we're going to do that for sales, marketing, engineering, finance, executive, security, and all the other rests. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to test this with the debug command once more to see what will return. We see that Bob Blue is a member of that 50 sales group in Active Directory. So when ADSync has finished, we expect that he is going to be added to the Syncplicity sales group. That is finished, so let's check the user operations file. It shows that the user is going to be created, and when we expect the group operations file, we see that Bob Blue is now also going to be added to the sales group. So that's excellent. That's cool. So the last thing I'd like to do is the role mapping, and therefore I'm going to open the configuration file once more. And what I'm going to do is there is an Active Directory group called 21 Syncplicity Global Admins. I'm going to map that group to the role administrator. So everyone part of that Active Directory group will become a Syncplicity Global Admin. And then I'm going to also synchronize the support administrators who are part of the group 020 Syncplicity Support Admins. Everyone in that group will become a support administrator. There's no ability to view that in a log file. So therefore, I really need to run the ADSync tool with the parameter -s. And actually, maybe to tell you at this moment, I also added all my other users. I've made in the support administrators also these users, and those are the global admins, where you see all these people will become a global admin. And very much I'm interested in the Syncp admin, who needs to be a global admin. One thing you should not forget, you remember that there is an API user that we created. That API user was used to talk to Syncplicity and create and do the Active Directory sync. And you're going to see that this user is also in the Active Directory. This is very important. Make sure that you have the API user, or the user you're going to use to synchronize to Syncplicity, to talk to Syncplicity, that this user is also part of the Active Directory domain. Otherwise, in the next batch, it says, hey, this API user is not an Active Directory, therefore I'm going to disable, or even worse, I'm going to delete that user in Syncplicity. And that also means that the connection with Syncplicity will break. So make sure that you have the user used for Active Directory sync also part of the Active Directory, and also part of the users that need to be synced from AD to Syncplicity. Great. I'm going to run this with ADSync-s, right? So that executed, and actually the best way to verify if everything worked is go and look in the Syncplicity console. So I'm going to search for user Bob. He exists, has never logged in. Also notice first name, last name, and the same goes for Peter. And if I now search for Mr. Syncp admin, that user is now a global admin. I had set up a synchronization to collect all the users from this group. I've also synchronized groups, like for example the sales group. That meant that Mr. Bob Blue and Peter Red, who were added to my Syncplicity users, automatically get activated, and also their first name and last name has been filled in. With that, I've done everything I wanted. So let's go back to our checklist. If I look at my schedule, we've configured ADSync right now, created the LDAP queries to sync users, groups, do the group name mappings, and also created role mappings to synchronize global administrators and support administrators. Tested it, we executed the ADSync even with a -s, and we saw that users were created. So the last thing we need to talk about is the scheduling, because this ADSync just executes the sync when we launch the process ADSync-S. By default, we don't have a scheduler. We rely on a different tool to do that scheduling, which is the case for many of our customers. They have their own job scheduler who will execute this job. Now, if you don't have a job scheduler, what you can do is you can install the scheduler for Linux, which is actually the Vixie cron. Note that you need access to the CentOS and the EPEL repositories to fetch that. So what I now can do is do a cron tab -e, and I can now schedule the execution. I prepared this a little bit, so in your case it will probably be empty. And therefore, let me point you to some samples how this might look like. So I've given you the command to install the Vixie cron, run this command to add it to the startup of the appliance, and then do that cron tab -e. Where you see here in the manual, you can define if a job needs to run every minute, every hour, every day, every month. In this case, it will execute the schedule every 5 minutes. It will launch that command, the ADSync-S, and it will write the output of this to the var log ADSync log. Some other samples that you see here, if you want to execute it every 15 minutes or every 15 minutes between 8 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening, or run it every hour. On the internet you will find a lot more of these samples if you want to learn more about the cron tab. That's out of the scope for now. So I've created this schedule, and that means that from now on, actually I need to start the schedule, or otherwise I had to reboot the machine. But once that is done, I know that every 5 minutes my Active Directory will get synced with Syncplicity. If I want to see the output of that log file, I'll do a tail, and that means that it will constantly show the log file. So what I could do now is I could add, for example, Bob Blue also to the marketing department. Let me do that for a demo purpose. Voila. I've added Bob also to the marketing department. And I will see in the next run that Bob will be added into the marketing department. And by tailing the log file, I can see that that happened now. And to verify that my user Bob is now also part of the marketing group, I will navigate to the marketing group here in Syncplicity, and I can see that Bob Blue is added to this. I can also do the opposite. I'm gonna remove Bob from this group. I do a refresh, and we see that Bob was now removed. So we're not only adding users to group, we also remove people from group according to the Active Directory. And actually that completes our setup of the ADSync. We have configured the ADSync tool to synchronize users, provision users, and do group membership sync. We scheduled it to be executed every 5 minutes. And we have tested this by moving users from one group to the other. So with that, our demo is complete. We hope you find it interesting. If you have any questions on ADSync, feel free to forward them to us or contact your Axway contact person to get more information or any assistance with ADSync. Thank you and have a good day. Bye-bye.